The night began with deafening cheers and sky-high expectations. Every camera in the stadium followed Arch Manning as he jogged onto the field. This wasn't just another freshman quarterback. This was a Manning. The legacy of Peyton and Eli hung over him like a crown, passed down from one generation of football royalty to the next. Fans had come not to see a player tested, but to see a coronation. They believed they were witnessing the beginning of something historic, but almost from the very first snap, something felt off. The timing wasn't there. The pocket seemed to collapse faster than expected. Balls sailed just a fraction too high or fell just a heartbeat too late. By halftime, the scoreboard told a brutal truth. Drives stalled out. Turnovers mounted. And the deafening cheers that had greeted Arch at kickoff faded into uneasy murmurs. The coronation was quickly turning into a cautionary tale. One interception ricocheted off a defender's helmet and dropped straight into a safety's waiting arms. On another series, Arch missed a wide-open receiver streaking down the sideline for what should have been a momentum-swinging touchdown. Analysts who had spent months hyping him as the next can't-miss superstar sat in stunned silence as the mistakes piled up. And then, as it always does, social media delivered its verdict. Hashtags like Manning Meltdown trended by the third quarter. Highlight reels of misfires looped endlessly across Twitter and Instagram, turning every missed throw into viral content. For fans who came to witness the rise of a legend, the reality was much harder to accept. This wasn't just a rough night. It was the kind of game that forces everyone, scouts, media, and fans alike, to question the narrative. Was the hype machine too loud? Were the expectations too heavy? And why, after such a disastrous outing, were commentators so quick to frame it as growing pains instead of holding Manning to the same harsh standard other young quarterbacks face? As the final whistle blew, the cameras panned to Arch jogging off the field, stone-faced and silent. And that's when the story shifted. Because waiting in the wings was Shedeur Sanders, a quarterback who knows better than anyone how brutal the spotlight can be when the narrative doesn't work in your favor. The locker room buzzed with the usual post-game chaos, reporters elbowing for space, cameras flashing, players peeling tape from sore muscles. Into that storm stepped Sanders, calm but clearly fired up. A reporter asked about Manning's rough performance. Shedeur didn't dodge. He took a deliberate breath and said plainly, "There's a double standard out here. Some quarterbacks get called resilient after a bad game. Others get called everything but a professional. That's a fact." The room fell silent. Reporters glanced at one another, waiting to see if he'd stop there. He didn't. "I'm not talking trash about Arch," he continued, his tone steady but firm. "I'm talking about how the coverage works. When certain guys struggle, it's growing pains. When guys like me struggle, it's a full-blown crisis. You see it, I see it. Everyone sees it." Those words hit like a thunderclap. Within minutes, national outlets were replaying the clip on a loop. Twitter debates raged. Instagram feeds lit up. Sanders hadn't just commented on the game. He had thrown a spotlight on a much deeper issue in college football. By morning, the headlines were everywhere. Shedeur Sanders speaks out on QB double standards. Analysts split into camps. Some praised his courage for addressing what many players whisper about but rarely say out loud. Others accused him of stirring controversy and shifting focus from the game itself. But whether you agreed or disagreed, no one could deny the truth. Sanders had forced a conversation that couldn't be ignored. The irony was impossible to miss. On the same morning that television panels described Arch's nightmare outing as a valuable learning experience, those same outlets had only weeks earlier shredded Sanders for far less. Identical stat lines, very different headlines. When Arch failed, it was framed as development. When Shedeur faltered, it was painted as a crisis. Fans noticed. Twitter threads stacked screenshots side by side. Arch Manning's struggles, growing pains. Shedeur Sanders' struggles, exposed. Reddit boards erupted with debates. Radio call-in shows filled with fans arguing about whether Sanders was right. Even former players weighed in. One retired quarterback remarked, "When your last name is Manning, people assume you'll figure it out. When your last name is Sanders, people wait for you to prove you're not just hype." And that's what cut to the heart of Sanders' critique. Both Arch and Shedeur carry famous surnames. Arch inherited the Manning crown, a legacy of Super Bowl rings and NFL Hall of Fame potential. Shedeur carries the shadow of Deion Primetime Sanders, one of the most iconic figures in sports history. Both arrived with heavy expectations. But while Arch has often been cushioned by patience and forgiveness, Shedeur has lived under the constant demand to prove himself every single week. The double-edged sword of legacy was laid bare. Manning's name insulated him from criticism. Sanders' name magnified it. The system wasn't fair, and Shedeur had the courage to say it out loud. By midweek, the conversation stretched far beyond football. Sports writers penned op-eds about bias in coverage. National networks hosted roundtables on fairness in athletics. Hashtags like jar double standard and jar same stats different story trended across platforms. Even some coaches, speaking carefully to avoid backlash, admitted Sanders had a point. One offensive coordinator put it this way: "Every quarterback develops at his own pace, but we'd be lying if we said all quarterbacks are judged the same." The debate reached beyond Arch and Shedeur. It forced fans and analysts to reckon with how college football operates. Recruiting services crown certain prospects years before they step on campus. TV networks line up primetime slots based on names that guarantee ratings. Sponsors flood in for players with built-in fan bases. And when those players falter, the narrative bends to protect the investment. Others, without that cushion, are left to face the storm alone. For Arch, the path forward is steep. Every snap he takes will now be weighed against the Manning mythos. Every mistake will whisper doubts about whether he can truly live up to it. For Shedeur, the burden is just as heavy, but in a different way. Every success becomes validation. Every stumble becomes an opportunity for critics to pounce. His fight isn't just on the field, it's against the narrative itself. Yet in speaking out, Sanders changed the story. What began as a disastrous night for Arch Manning became something bigger, a mirror held up to college football. A challenge to fans, analysts, and journalists to confront the uncomfortable truth that not all athletes are judged equally. As the season pushes toward its climax, the stakes couldn't be higher. Manning faces top-ranked defenses in the coming weeks, each game a test of whether the hype was justified. Sanders, meanwhile, must continue not only delivering strong performances, but carrying the weight of his words. Scouts, executives, and media members will watch every throw with added scrutiny, searching for confirmation of their biases, or proof that Sanders was right all along. One thing is certain: both quarterbacks are now playing for more than wins and losses. They're playing for narrative control, for perception, for fairness. So here's the question that lingers louder than any stadium buzzer. Will college football finally reckon with the double standards Shedeur exposed? Or will the cycle repeat itself when the next big-name prospect takes the field? Because whatever happens, this season has made one thing undeniable. The games may be played on Saturdays, but the real battle, the one over perception, legacy, and fairness, is being fought every day in headlines, talk shows, and social feeds. And thanks to Shedeur Sanders, that battle is now impossible to ignore.